Welcome back, intrepid adventurer. It seems like you want to be playing the new Blood Spear Necromancer hotness, but maybe some of these very common problems you yourself have run into. Have you ever run into this? Aw, geez, no matter what I do, I'm just constantly running out of resources. How do I handle this drain? Have you ever found yourself in this sticky situation? I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I have all the gear they recommend. I even have the mythic, but no matter how often I try, I can't keep my maximum life up. I just keep draining and then I eventually die. And you couldn't possibly have fallen into this treacherous trap. I can definitely output the damage and I can absolutely get the thing going, but when I need it, Bone Prison isn't available for me. I keep running out and I can't overpower. If this sounds like you, do not fret, because we have all of the answers to every question you've been asking ever since you found out about that new temptress, the Blood Spear Necromancer. On a more serious note, I have been getting a lot of questions related to various systems about this, I'll go ahead and call it, an incredibly complicated build. Now, this just so happens to be a common thing with Necromancers. If you want to play our best build, you gotta know how a lot of it works. So I'm going to include timestamps down below to each one of the very common issues people have been running into. And then at the end, I'm also just going to give a complete overview of quite literally how does the build function. So if you want to watch that one first, go ahead and do that. Just jump to that timestamp. Or if you feel like you already know how it functions, but you're just running into these individual issues, check those ones out individually. I will not be offended. I just want to make sure that you have everything that you need to be able to absolutely blast for the entirety of this upcoming weekend. Because, you know, I got to take care of you. It's a fun build, but there's a lot going on underneath the hood. Starting off with the biggest issue people are running into is basically constantly running out of essence. And there's a lot of different factors that play into this. But first and foremost, a list of things that you need to do right now to fix your build is change one of the affixes on your weapon. We originally were thinking that lucky hit chance on your jewelry was going to be good enough to be able to restore your resource, and it just isn't. So your weapon should include intelligence, maximum life, and then as a third affix, chance to restore resource. You'll notice that right here, while it has the same 15% chance of triggering, it will fully restore all of your resource. So every single time it goes off, the entirety of your essence orb will completely refill. This is just what we're going with now. It is strictly the best option. The second best option is actually going to be a combination of magic runes. So basically everybody should be able to get their hands on it, and it is Cure and Lum. Cure rune says cast a skill 5 times and you generate 300 offering. Lum says for every 5 offering you generate 3.5 resource. So all in all, you can see here it restores 210 resource by casting a skill 5 times. So every 3 seconds you will completely refill the entirety of your essence globe. This is basically what I was running on up until getting into Torment 4 and fighting Torment 4 bosses, where the rest of my gear finally caught up with me. This is by far your best tool. So lucky hit chance on your weapon as an affix, and then this combination of runes. A lot of people have also been running into an issue with Great Feast where it's constantly draining and they can't manage it. Quite frankly, just take the aspect off. The first best replacement aspect that you can use is Cadaverous. This is fully automated since Indira's pants are going to consume corpses for us. But basically, if you got a perfect roll of it, it would be a 35% damage multiplier for just constantly consuming corpses. So it's a difference of a 35% multi versus a 45%. Whereas Great Feast has this downside. Bare minimum, if you are using Great Feast, make sure that's not on your amulet or your weapon, because that will increase how much resource it drains from you. Replace it with Cadaverous, or as another alternative, you can actually replace it with Rathma's Chosen. Rathma's Chosen gives you a huge amount of attack speed in attack speed cap 2 whenever you overpower with the blood skill, and this will drastically increase your DPS output. Depending on how good your gear is, basically the better your gear is, the slighter the bonus from this is. But if you're on low gear, you haven't tempered on blood attack speed yet on any of your gear either, this is a massive, massive increase in damage. Don't sleep on it. The next thing that people are probably complaining about the most often is being able to cast Bone Prison often enough to actually be able to make the build run. Now, when you are in the pit, you'll be resetting the cooldown of Bone Prison very easily. Monsters live long enough for you to be able to proc Decrepify. And remember that Decrepify is basically the primary engine that we're going to use for resetting our Corpse Tendrils, our Soul Rift, as well as Bone Prison. And this is very easy to do, again, in the pit. But when you are speed farming, when you're trying to do Helltide or Infernal Horde or anything like that, it's very difficult to actually proc this enough because everything dies too fast. So Bone Prison itself has about 3 primary vectors that you can use to be able to reduce its cooldown most easily, and I'm just going to show you the best one right off the rip. It's what I'm personally going to be recommending for the speed farming setup of this build once I put that out, and I'm pretty sure that Sirach in our guide on max roll, he's going to be updating that as well to include this. Look forward to that in the near future. But the name of the game here is actually changing the temper on your ring over to rapid ossification. You can put this onto your amulet as well as both of your rings, getting you a total of 9 ranks without having to masterwork crit on it. Rapid ossification says that for every 100 resource that you spend, you'll reduce a bone skills cooldown by 0.5 seconds. So when I go ahead and put all 12 ranks on, the 3 from each piece of my jewelry and the 3 in the base skill, it will reduce bone skill cooldown by 6 seconds. So by casting Bone Spear 4 times, I will reduce the cooldown of Bone Prison by 6 seconds. Since my Bone Prison's cooldown is only 10 seconds, I'm also going to be proccing Lucky Hit every once in a while. You can go ahead and see very quickly how we're going to get this thing down, but let me show you it in the game. I cast my Bone Prison, I start spamming Bone Spear, and I can already recast my Bone Prison, and then I can already recast my Bone Prison, and I can already recast my Bone Prison, etc., etc. This is absolutely going to be the way forward for speed farming, and is definitely your best option. Now, there are some less efficient options that don't require you to hit specific tempers that we can also explore. The worst of these would be actually putting additional points into Bone Prison. Bone Prison's cooldown is naturally reduced for each point that you put in it, so right now it's 10.18. If I were to put an additional point in, it drops down to 9.81. Now, luckily, we only need to put the 1 point in because we actually get a ton of bone skill ranks from our Path of Trigul boots. That's why it's already up at rank 5. And while you can't necessarily choose this, you can always go with the option of having a Path of Trigul that actually has either Masterwork crits on Bone Prison cooldown or a greater affix on it as well. And while I would never recommend going for that or shopping for that, if you didn't want to use any of the other systems, technically there is an out here. The last option that you have is actually swapping over to Blood Wave itself, because Blood Wave will cast a Bone Prison for you. So by casting a Blood Wave at a target and then moving forward and attacking, it'll eventually spawn a Bone Prison, which you can attack into, and then when that one would run out, you can cast your own Bone Prison. I did try this out in speed farming. I didn't personally like how the gameplay felt. You had to basically be constantly shuffling forward to be eating up blood orbs while you attacked, just so that you could continue to trigger things as you go, waiting for the Bone Prison to generate. But you'll notice that if I ever cast Blood Wave into an area where their monsters can't get knocked into, or a wall, etc., it doesn't spawn the Bone Prison because it still tries to do it at the end of the arc, even if you can never get there yourself. One of the ones that you might be running into, again, just because of how we originally had the max roll guide written, but it's the inability to fortify. And I promise you, we're not completely incompetent. We just kind of overlooked this one little thing. Because in the end game, you'll have Shroud of False Death that will actually grant you +1 passives to all of your skills. Looking at your skill tree with this, you'll notice that you are considered to have a point in Drain Vitality and a point in Necrotic Carapace. This is actually enough to fully maintain your fortified status on the build. Obviously, myself included, not everybody's going to have a Shroud of False Death. So what you're basically going to do is you're going to take out 2 of the points from Lucky Hit Chance here, or from the movement speed here, and put 1 point into Drain Vitality and 1 point into Necrotic Carapace. That is more than what you need to be able to fully fortify all the time. Sorry for the inconvenience, just drop 1 point here and 1 point here. One of the more common questions that I've been receiving is, how do I handle the life drain? Now, obviously this is going to be covered in the mechanics of the build section, because you have to understand how the build works for this to make sense to you. But the long and short of it is, people do not think that they have to be casting Bone Prison as often as possible, or in more dire situations, find themselves in a place where they have to continue to fight, but Bone Prison isn't off of cooldown yet. So what are some ways that you can mitigate the life loss here so that you're not basically ending up dead when it could have been avoided? One of the easier ways of being able to mitigate is actually in the Lord Zir boss power. Lord Zir boss power at rank 20 will activate on your main boss power and then heal you for 36% of your maximum life over 3 seconds. So it's 12% of your maximum life per second, meaning that it's offsetting more than a single cast of Bone Spear eating a corpse every second. Now that's not enough to fully offset the life, but you can see how already it is absolutely helping out a ton. So without even having a Bone Prison down, you notice that I'm basically maintaining maximum life for a very long time. That's actually, oh, That's actually really good. That's actually outperforming even what I thought it would. Quite frankly, I wasn't expecting it to do that well, but at rank 20, that's what you can see from it. Now, another option is actually in using the mercenary Variana. Variana has Taste of Flesh down the left side of her board, which says that when you deal direct damage to a target that's bleeding from her, and basically Whirlwind applies bleed, her Cleave can apply bleed, and even her base attack can apply bleed. It should basically be up nearly all of the time, but you'll restore 2% of your maximum life. And then things like healing received from your passive tree, etc., will further increase this. Again, it won't fully offset the loss of life, but it could definitely help to mitigate it in a pretty meaningful way. Now, there are a few other things that you can do to keep yourself safe while you're waiting to be able to drain life properly or whatever you're having to deal with. The first one amongst these will probably be Blackmailer's Sabotage. This will generate barrier based off of how much you fortify, which can help to offset any barrier loss you might have from not having Soul Rift up currently. But just tossing this one on very quickly and then attacking, you'll notice that all of a sudden I'm generating a pretty decent amount of barrier, but it's just enough to be able to keep you in the black while you're dealing with things. Again, Soul Rift is off of cooldown, or maybe Bone Prison was off of cooldown. You could basically barrier for the totality of what your maximum life would be. It's like gaining double the effect of life. And while this one isn't directly related to the draining of life and being able to recoup it, it does just come down to one of the options for being able to get tankier faster. This build is going to be recommending Scent of Death, and Scent of Death is typically going to be recommended either on the 4th or 5th board because it's not a particularly valuable board outside of that. But what Scent of Death does offer you is increased damage reduction. So if you personally found yourself to be a little bit squishy, maybe you can't really deal with everything that's coming at you, you're in too hard content, or your gear isn't high enough, you can definitely consider slotting in Scent of Death significantly earlier in the board. You can pick it up as your 3rd board. You would lose the ability to build into the resistances that are here, but after picking up your basic board and then building into Bloodbath, it would be fine to pick it up as your 3rd board, which again would just make you tankier earlier in your progression, and then you can respec back out of this later on once you have the gear to be able to support it. Now, when we're talking about a build and what is required to be able to play the build, we're talking about minimum gear investments. I often am being looked at and saying, hey Mac, I just hit level 60, can I play this build? Or hey Mac, I just got the helmet, can I play this build? I just got the pants, can I play this build? And the answers are both yes and no. So let's go ahead and talk about why each one is important and how I would prioritize getting them. Technically speaking, the pants are the reason why the build exists. It's what turns it into a blood skill, it's what allows it to eat corpses. It automates Flesh Eater, and it makes it so you can start outputting a good amount of damage. Not only that, you can scale into blood damage and overpower. But that being said, just tossing these pants on and trying to run the build is not going to work well. So these are definitely your first priority, but I wouldn't start playing the build just yet. A lot of people are going to think that Deathless Visage is the next up, but I think that in reality, it's actually Path of Trigul. Let me just go ahead and show you why. I have all of these monsters here, and I need to be able to attack into a Bone Prison to be able to overpower. Let me go ahead and cast regular Bone Prison, and you'll notice just how hilariously small this area is. Now, I'm not typically a size queen, and I'm not about to shame you if your own bone hole is not necessarily up to the task. But not being able to overpower and hit as many enemies as possible is a drastic reduction in your ability to output damage, but also to survive. Path of Trigul comes in and Giga Chads all over everybody inside of the arena. You can fit so many baddies inside of this thing. I feel like a used car salesman slapping the back of a Ford Fiesta. But Path of Trigul, I argue, is what truly enables this build to be able to start outputting damage and be able to start hitting density at a much higher rate. But if you have Indiras and you have Path of Trigul, should you start playing this build? Still, I would argue no. The third most important thing isn't Deathless, it's actually Bone Dusters. Bone Dusters is actually what makes this build work, all things considered. Bone Spear is guaranteed to overpower when an enemy is within a bone prison, and it increases your damage. This is what allows us to heal to offset the drain. This is what allows us to actually enable overpower 100% of the time to get all of our damage dealers. It's what really turns us into a blood build. Indiras is basically just there for theming. But once you have Bone Dusters and you're able to fully basically circumvent all the downsides of the build, the moment that a bone prison is on a target, that's when you are fully functional. Or at least, that's when the build starts working. Because after Bone Dusters, clearly it's Deathless Visage. No, Actually, not at all. I would argue that it is a collection of increased attack speed and critical strike chance. So to that end, it's when you begin tempering on blood attack speed, potentially adding on Rathma's Chosen as an additional aspect, and then finally Grasping Veins. Grasping Veins not only granting you a huge damage multiplier, but a massive amount of crit chance. You need to be able to crit 100% of the time for the build to be truly online, in addition to the overpower to actually get damage out of this. And being able to reach crit cap can be very difficult, but luckily there's a boss power that can help you in both of these fronts. The first one is Hatred's Embrace. This is one of the lower tier boss powers, and it's going to increase your critical strike chance, and it can reach a cap of 50% total bonus, and it scales off of your shatter resistance, something that you're going to naturally build into. But with just this on right now, if we were to go look at my character, I currently have a whopping 61 critical strike chance, with 50 of that obviously being from the boss power. Now at this point, with even a kind of okay rolled Grasping Veins, I'm already at 100%. If you personally need a little bit more crit chance, you can take out a couple points and drop them into an Inspiring Leader. You definitely want to be at 100%. The other option for being able to increase your attack speed is actually Torusk's Rage. This will go into cap 2, so this will go along with all of your blood attack speed, as well as Rathma's Chosen. Remember, you can't go above 100% in either one of the caps, so if that's going to get you over that, it's not particularly valuable, but this can definitely help out a little bit. So just to replay that in order, technically the pants are the first step. I would argue that Bone Duster is actually the second step, and then once you have Path of Trigul, I think you can begin piloting the build and having it feel fairly good. I'm actually going to make an addendum and say that then you need the lucky hit chance on your weapon, and you're going to start flying. After that, get your critical strike chance up to 100% and get as much blood attack speed temper across all of your gear as you possibly could, and then throw on a Deathless Visage so you can actually start scaling your damage and all the various procs of summoning multiple spears. And that's where I would say the minimum gear investment for it to start feeling good really comes from. And then the last question that I get often has to deal with the Dark Dance. 1, where do you get it? 2, why would we use it? So to understand Dark Dance very quickly, it basically says that if a skill would consume life, meaning the amount of life that you lose from Indiras, you will gain a 120% damage multiplier. Now, 1, I know that it's gold, meaning it's not meant to actually scale, but for whatever reason, this scales on your amulet. So it starts off at 80%, bumps up to 120%. One of the great things about it is since this doesn't have a roll on it, regardless of the top value, you will always get the maximum damage out of this aspect. Literally, don't worry about that top number at all or what the effect says. It doesn't matter. And yes, it has a plus symbol next to it. That is also just a misnomer. It's absolutely a multiplier. I've retested it just to make sure, but this is a multiplier. It is an insanely powerful aspect. But the confusion on the aspect comes down to the fact that this is something that increases the amount of damage that you deal. So clearly it's an offensive aspect. Well, in reality, this is actually a resource aspect. Dark Dance, indicated here with the green, is a resource aspect. That means that this can only spawn on rings as well as amulets. And the reason why you're probably not finding one is because, oddly enough, there aren't a lot of rings and amulets that drop in the game typically. So what you want to be doing is gambling with your obols for rings. The reason why you want to gamble for rings is 1, you just need good rings in the first place, but 2, even though this could also spawn on an amulet can have any aspect in the game, whereas rings can only have offensive and resource. So they have the smallest pool of total aspects that they could be, and that's why you want to gamble for them. Not only that, if you find good rings that you don't personally need, you can sell them off. People are really looking into this build, meaning it's very popular, meaning all of the gear that you get is very valuable. So if you click this timestamp, you're made to this part of the video, we're going to be describing quite literally how the build functions so that hopefully you can intuit a lot of the questions that you might have and come to the correct conclusions. Because unlike other builds in this game where you kind of just hold down a button and delete everything, the Necromancer tends to have a lot of setup and a lot of systems that require things to be in place for it to work. So without trying to yap your ear off, let's talk about quite literally how this build runs. Indira's Memory is going to turn Bone Spear into a blood skill. This will gain every tag that deals with blood. Anything that refers to blood damage will now work for it. So things like blood attack speed as a temper will now increase Bone Spear's attack speed. And while technically as an interaction with Blood Wave, we literally don't care about that. The big thing is that Bone Spear is now going to consume corpses to spawn additional Bone Spears from them. And this is going to drain your maximum life. When you do this naturally, it'll fire off another Bone Spear. Things like chance to cast Bone Spear twice will now work, not only for your base Bone Spear, but from the ones that are spawned from the corpses. So you're going to be able to fire off 4 Bone Spears into targets. This is incredibly important for a further mechanic, but it's also going to just drastically increase your damage. But the draining on life is the thing that we need to deal with. And not only that, now that we're a blood skill, we can more easily overpower and we can scale into overpower, but we don't have a way to do so. But if we can find a way to overpower, we can use Supernatural Bone Spear, which will give us a huge damage multiplier for overpowering, and it will restore 5% of our maximum life after we do so. Keep in mind that while it takes 5% of our maximum life as the base, things that say increase healing received will push this even further. So now all we need is 2 different bone spears to overpower to completely offset the amount of maximum life that we lose from the bone spear triggering. This is where Bone Dusters comes in. Bone Dusters says that if our bone spear hits a target in a bone prison, then it will overpower. If it does overpower, that means it will heal. And again, since we can hit up to 100% chance to double cast on Bone Spear, means a single cast of Bone Spear will now completely heal us, even against a single target. By putting a target into a bone prison and casting a single Bone Spear, you'll notice that our maximum life does not move. Now also keep in mind that draining maximum life is not the same thing as taking damage. So even though I have a ton of barrier here, I can actually continue to lose life even though I have barrier. I'm not actually taking damage, it is loss of life. This is kind of similar to Magic the Gathering, where these two things are not the same. So things like damage reduction or armor or resistances will not minimize how much we are drained from this effect. Because we need to be able to hit as many targets as possible inside of a bone prison, you need to deal with 2 realities. One, bone prison is naturally very small. Luckily, Path of Trigul will drastically increase the size of your bone prison and also has a fairly long cooldown. So we need to be able to reset the cooldown of bone prison so we can consistently cast it. Decrepify the curse, when applied to a target, will make it so that we can reset cooldowns with a low lucky hit chance. Now, luckily, Bone Spear itself actually has a massive lucky hit chance, and every damage instance that Bone Spear does can trigger this. This includes the actual spear itself, any of the bone shards that fire back from it, any of the echoes from Deathless Visage, as well as any of the additional bone spears that are cast from Indira's memory. So you're actually able to proc this very quickly. But it also means that we need to be able to apply a curse to the target to be able to get this benefit. Now, there are 3 ways that you can go about doing that. One, you could just manually cast the curse. Putting Decrepify on your skill bar instead of Decompose or Reap, whichever one is recommended in the build guide that you're looking at, will allow you to proactively cast the curse. But typically this is a little bit clunky. Cursed Aura Aspect, which you see around me right now, will automatically apply the curse, but only to targets within range. And Bone Spirit typically likes to attack from range. So the best way of doing this is actually a combination of the runes Tam and Wat. Casting a non-channeled core skill 4 times will trigger the curse application to a target. So by attacking this character 1, 2, you see that we cast our curse. And since we are continuously spamming, we'll be continuously reapplying this curse to every target within the area. This is definitely the best way of going about doing it. And by proactively dropping these curses on top of targets, we can more proactively reduce all of our cooldowns, meaning that Bone Prison is available more often, our Soul Rift is available more often, even our Corpse Tendrils is available more often. So the more curses we can apply to the more targets and the more damage instances that we can get, the faster all of these systems can be used. Deathless Visage has 2 incredibly important components to it: the chance to cast Bone Spear Missile twice, actually casting twice, and then the dropping of an echo. The echo is going to deal damage in an area around it. It is these red little pool orbs here that you see, the ones that are here that go pop, pop, pop. Those are the echoes. These echoes will also overpower whenever Bone Spear overpowers, and as long as the target is within a bone prison, all of the damage instances will always overpower. That's why you're seeing all of the blue and orange numbers. The echoes also trigger lucky hit chance. They also carry any damage modifiers that Bone Spear would, so they are considered a blood skill, they are considered a core skill, they're considered a bone skill. They will get increased critical strike damage, overpower damage, etc., etc. They scale in the exact same way that the Bone Spear itself scales. And then because Indira's memory makes it so that our Bone Spear will now drain life can be used to trigger an incredibly powerful aspect called Dark Dance. Dark Dance says that if you have a skill that consumes life, you gain a large damage multiplier. Yes, it's a multiplier, even though it has an addition sign on it, and this is probably one of the greatest scaling damages that you have available to you. Functionally, that's the end of how the build works. So let's just recap it very quickly. We want to cast Bone Spear and we want to overpower. To be able to overpower, a target has to be in a bone prison. To be able to cast Bone Prison proactively, we need to be able to reset reset its cooldown, either Decrepify procs from our curse, as well as rapid ossification ranks in our skill tree, and you always want to be attacking into a bone prison, because if you do not, you will begin draining your maximum life, and sadly you cannot offset this with anything other than gaining life, so things like damage reduction resistances won't help. While barrier can help out a little bit, eventually you will no longer be able to drain your maximum life. And the issue with that is that if you can't drain your maximum life, you can't consume corpses. And the corpse generation and the corpse consumption is key to be able to maintain a ton of very valuable damage multipliers vis-a-vis Flesh Eater in our Paragon, as well as Fueled by Death in our skill tree. Everything else that the build is attempting to do is just to further increase this damage. Corpse tendrils will drag monsters into the area of your bone prison to make sure that you are consistently dealing damage, as well as applying powerful crowd control, and with the use of Grasping Veins aspect, additional critical strike chance to be able to reach cap, and a huge damage multiplier. Decompose is mostly on the skill bar just to be able to increase Reaper's Pursuit to get the maximum bonus out of it, but one of the benefits of it is that it is a basic skill. It will not trigger your rune word Cax to be able to eat its proc, and you'll be able to use this to actually draw aggro from enemies. Basically, you can do this while you're running around to draw in enemies so that everybody is nice and grouped up before you start attacking them. Blight itself will typically only be cast against really tanky packs because while it doesn't really do damage, it increases all damage that you do by 20%. Make sure to cast this on bosses as well as elite monsters. Soul Rift is your primary tool for being able to further increase how much resource you're generating, be able to apply vulnerable to enemies proactively if you don't have bone prison up, and to be able to generate a near infinite amount of barrier. Not only that, it will actually help to regenerate your health potions, which if you've ever ran this build, you'll notice that you start using health potions a lot more often whenever bone prison is on cooldown. So this is unironically a pretty huge get. And that, my friends, is the Blood Spear Necromancer, the hot tea, the flavor of the week, the next build that you're going to want to try. It is amazing for bossing. It is amazing for pit pushing. Even though it has a decent amount of things that you need to get going for the build to come online, even non-ancestral versions of this gear without masterwork will do more than well enough to be able to carry you all the way up into world tier 4. You are definitely most at home in the pit and at bossing, and to be able to better farm in other areas, you either can play a lot more sweatily or use a lot of the tips that I described in the other timestamps, be able to manage your bone prison cooldown and be able to use it more proactively and on demand. As we continue to play the build, we'll further optimize it. Both the max roll build guide will get updated with our best up-to-date wisdom, as well as the personal planner that I maintain in my own Discord. Remember that my boy Sirach is actually the writer of the guide on max roll. We are obviously collaborating together. Anything that I learn, he learns. Anything that he learns, I learn. So look forward to that build guide continuing to have in-depth, detailed breakdowns of this, and I hope that this video can be used by anybody who is running into these issues and just have a quick help guide. If you appreciated this video, if it taught you something that you didn't know, or if you walked away now understanding this build and you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. I hope at this point you've at least seen a couple things that you like. Maybe I'm just popping up in your algorithm, but go ahead and check that button. It would mean the world to me. Leave a like on the video as well. It helps me out a ton. Leave a comment down below. Did you have any other remaining questions, any new ideas, thoughts, concerns? Have you run into any weird bugs? Have you run into any weird interactions? Have you tried an interesting build? Let me know. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching this video. I truly hope that it helps, and I hope that everybody walking into the start of this season over this weekend gets to blast on the Blood Spear Necromancer, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.